One thing correlated to time, I have another chapter in the book where I talk about being an impossibility achiever, an impossibility thinker, and a possibility achiever. And what I mean when I say that is that oftentimes as entrepreneurs, or even as just human beings, over time, we begin to operate out of our history and our memory. That's the program running, as opposed to our imagination and our dreams. If you're gonna be an effective entrepreneur, you're a dreamer. You're constantly in your imagination. You operate in the present, and that's where time management matters. But you are constantly, any great entrepreneur that I know, and I've known Steve Wozniak's a dear friend of mine, right? He's founder of Apple. Talks all the time about Jobs' imagination. He just couldn't turn the thing off, right? As an entrepreneur, you're in the dream business, you're in the imagination business, and most aren't, and most suffer for that. They're so in the day-to-day of getting something done. I'll get around to the imagination stuff, Ed. I've got to execute and close the sale so I can put food on the table right now. I get all that. You will always just execute and have to put food on the table if you don't get into your imagination. You're operating out of your memory and your history too often. And this is a huge change for most people. When we're children, I believe we're happier for two reasons when we're young. One, we were just with God not too long ago. So our proximity to God was very recent. The second thing is we live in our imaginations. And as we get a little bit older, we start to operate in patterns out of history and memory, and our imagination is suppressed. Be a good boy. Be quiet, honey. And they start to have this imagination and these dreams suppressed. By the time we become adults, they're almost gone altogether. The fact that you're an entrepreneur means you're a dreamer, means at some point you operated out of an imagination. That's what got you to make this leap. The other leaps you're going to make as an entrepreneur will require an even greater amount of your imagination and your dreams while executing in the present. That's why time matters. But it's not good enough just to manage time. Say, I'm going to execute right now and not have a grand vision and dream that's always expanding, always growing, always being refined, always being communicated to the right people, including you. And if you're a praying person, I happen to believe that when I pray, I'm in my imagination oftentimes. I'm having a conversation with God about my dreams and my vision, and I want to enroll Him in my dream, in my imagination. That's where they come from. The last thing I'll say is, your dreams are not some hallucination. I believe they're a preview, almost a whisper from God of saying, psst, this is what's possible. This is what's possible. He's not playing a trick on you. That's not how it works. And so when they happen, don't be afraid of them. Embrace them, run towards them, get closer to them, help them expand. Last thing, your mind moves towards what it's most familiar with. So if you're most familiar with your problems, your issues, your meetings, the stuff you got to execute on, you will always move towards that. But if you're most familiar with your dreams and your imagination, your mind begins to move and gravitate towards that because it's more familiar with it.
Wow. Mic drop, Ed. You got to go back and listen to that, folks. Just rewind the tape. That was so good. And it reminds me of a study NASA did on children. And a 5-year-old had genius, creativity levels. And that same 5-year-old, as they become an adult, 98% of them lose that. And so that it really comes down to that convergent thinking versus divergent thinking. As we go through the education system, we learn to have the right answer, stay in line. And what I love about entrepreneurs and our leaders listening out there is they're solving problems in a creative way. They have to lean into that divergent thinking if they want to have success. So there's some really powerful reminders in there.
Very well said, brother. I completely agree with you.
So let's get into productivity, because I think time management, we're all trying to manage time to be more productive. So we have to talk about inconvenience and to-do lists. I love what you say in the book. Greatness and convenience cannot coexist. They are diametrically opposed forces. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's counterintuitive, right? What we do normally is we want to move away from inconvenient things. The average human being has become very familiar with doing convenient things and avoiding the inconvenient. Napoleon Hill says in Think and Grow Rich, which is my second favorite book after the one I just wrote, other than my scriptures, because you don't just think and get rich. You have to do certain things. And that's why I wrote one about thinking and doing and congruency. But having said that, he says that if you can get to the other side, the temporary thing you're going through, that you get introduced to your other self. And that other self is why that problem exists. And so what you got to do when you're looking at a problem that you got or something that you need to solve, the inconvenient thing is the path to get it done. And so I've sort of started to build this muscle. When I look at my day, what's the most difficult thing I have to do? What's the most feared things first things first, not inconvenient things. Most human beings are not wired to do difficult things. They don't do hard things. And when you become familiar with doing hard and difficult things, I believe you become somebody completely different. So if you're constantly doing the easy stuff, you're not getting it done. I just interviewed Phil Heath, 7-time Mr. Olympia. And I said something to him that this guy's just gigantic, right? And I'm sure there's some supplementation going on there at some point, but the point that I made to him was, Phil, you have a different relationship with pain than most human beings do. Your relationship with pain is completely different. He says, gosh, I never even thought about that before. But he goes, I kind of chase pain because I know that's where all of my growth comes from. I said, when you hit the gym, you do the most inconvenient things, build the biggest muscles. This is true in every area of our life, but we have this proclivity, and if we're not conscious of it, we'll do it all the time. I don't want to do the inconvenient thing. I want to do the easier thing, the easier path. You build yourself or a company full of people who are willing to do the inconvenient, you are now in that success area of life. I really believe the athletes even that I coach and work with, and I don't work with Tom Brady, but one of the things I've studied about him is the people that I know that have been around him have told me that he's a psycho about wanting to do the inconvenient stuff in any given day, and that's changed the culture of the teams he's played on, where everyone's sort of chasing the inconvenient. And so that's my recommendation of the book is look at your day, look at the agenda and say, what's the inconvenient thing, and run towards it, not away from it.
Wow, that's powerful. I think that inconvenience is where any growth that's, real comes from, is that inconvenience and that season of pain and, suffering and grinding that out. You go, wow, I'm a different person than I was before, that other self that you're talking about. So that's such a great reminder.
Think about the fact that you have a business when you're listening to this. How daggum inconvenient was it to start this thing? It was unbelievably inconvenient. You probably had to leave a job that no one thought you should leave. Maybe you had to borrow some money, startup capital. You're probably negative financially in some cases, right? Like you've already done the most inconvenient thing, which is start your business. Stay down that road. Yeah. You're too often avoiding this. And here's the last thing I'll say. Or you've had a little bit of success. And once people have a little bit of success, now they don't think they have to do the inconvenient anymore. I already did that stuff. It's someone else's turn, not if you want to go to the next level. The next level requires the inconvenient thing. Every time it requires the inconvenient thing.
Well, that brings me to to-do lists. Now, a lot of leaders set up their to-do lists to try to gain those quick wins. They want to check it all off. But what you're saying here is completely different. Explain to us how to take an inconvenient approach to our to-do lists.
If you do the inconvenient thing first, you build gigantic momentum. The rest of your day is downhill. The rest of your 6 hours is downhill. So I'm a big to-do list person. Mine are not fancy. I just list the stuff I got to do. And when I start checking them off, I gain momentum. But I also believe if I knock the hardest thing off that list first, like I'm crushing the rest of my day. Like it's just slayed. If I get that done, all this other stuff becomes incredible. There's an important thing though when you're building confidence. I say in the book, I have a chapter on confidence, which is linked to this to-do list. If you lack self-confidence, you have a relationship or reputation with yourself where you do not keep the promises you make to yourself. And if you want to change your self-confidence, you have to begin to keep the promises you make to yourself. Okay? But the power of one more is the following. We don't always get our goals long term. We don't. We get 20-something% of them. We will always eventually get our standards. Always get our standards. And so if your standard is that you don't keep the promises you make to yourself, you're going to lose. If your standard is, I do the things on my to-do list every day, and you knock them out, you're going to have self-confidence. But if your standard is, I do everything on my to-do list and one more, now you've built somebody that is not going to be taken lightly in the business world. So the standard should be, I do what I say I'm going to do and one more. I'm going to do 30 minutes on the treadmill in the gym, I do 31. I'm going to make 10 contacts today, I make 11. I'm going to tell my daughter I love her, I'm going to tell her twice. You start having the one more standard in your life, and all of a sudden those to-do lists, these really inconvenient things, you now bring a confidence level with you to that list that allows you to do the difficult thing, to build the momentum, because you do one more.
Yeah, and every time you set that bar a little higher, your standard increases, your confidence increases. I mean, there's a lot of psychological advantages to what you're talking about as well.
Well, you say the important thing. It's not enough just to do these things. You have to make what I call a deposit in the confidence bank and say, look, I just did it. I did it. I'm doing things other people aren't willing to do, or I'm doing things I didn't used to do. Therefore, I deserve to get things I didn't get before or other people aren't getting. Give yourself credit.